want you to open your Bibles. We're going to look there in chapter 21 of the book of Genesis tonight. This is I think, an interesting thing. Some people look at this and they don't understand a lot of things that happened in Abraham's life. I look at Abraham as a man that wanted to do what God told him to do. He done it somewhat. He did leave his home. He didn't leave it exactly the way that God told him to. He said to leave his family. He took part of the family with him, took his nephew. Then they separated because of prosperity. We can see what happened there. And then God promised him again that he was going to have, of course, that he was going to have a son. And then we find that his wife, when she was getting older, she said, I'm not going to have any children. So she gave him her bondservant, her slave, personal slave, and of course, he took her as a wife, and all of a sudden, he had a son. But the bondservant was kind of proud, and should be. The only descendant of Abraham was that one boy. He was a great man. We can see he had many cattle and sheep and all this. We would think of him as being almost in our idea, we think of him as being a chief, if that makes sense, because he had many people. When he went to war, he took the people that was born in his own house, his own servant. We would say he was a big rancher. I guess is the way we would say it. He was a big rancher. But then we find that something happened. That is, again, God promised that Sarah was going to have a child. And he laughed. She laughed. But God didn't pay any attention to that laughter. We can see what happened. In verse 21, chapter 21, it says, and then the Lord visited Sarah as he had said, and the Lord did for Sarah as he had spoken. The Lord said it, he spoke it, then he done it. Pretty well what happened. He done it, and then for Sarah conceived and had Abraham a son in his old age, the set time of which Abraham had spoken to him. And Abraham called the name of his son that was born to him, whom Sarah bore to him, as what? Isaac, right? Isaac. And Abraham circumcised his son Isaac when he was 8 days old, as the Lord had commanded him. Now Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born to him. He was 100 years old. Now, the oldest man I know of, and there may be others y'all may know, I know a friend of mine who was 71 years old when his wife had their last child. He was 71. I thought that was pretty well something. Anybody know anyone older than that ever had a child? Any man? So I guess that's the oldest in here. And his wife was, I think, in her 40s when that happened. They already had a child who was about 13. And then all of a sudden they had one, and they had that child. I thought that was something. But the thing about it is, this was really something when they was 100 years old. And they had that child. And Sarah said, it says, God had made me laugh, and all who heard will laugh with me. And laugh, and some have said, what is the laughter? I've heard different things about this. I think it was a laughter of happiness. Does that make sense? I think it was a laugh of happiness. Because she wanted a what? She wanted a child. It says, and she also said, who would have said to Abraham that Sarah would nurse children, for I have borne him a son in his old age? He was old, and she was old, and they had that son. It says, so the child grew and was weaned, and Abraham made a great feast on the same day that Isaac was weaned. Now, we look at that today. In some cultures back then, even some isolated cultures today, they don't even name a child until it is weaned. Why? They lose a lot of children when they are young. They really do. And so it is customary. So they had a celebration when he was finally what? He was weaned. What time did they wean? Now we think of weaning a child, but weaning of a child back then usually was at least 2 years of age. At least 2 years of age, sometimes even 3 years of age. And I know people say, well, but I even know women today that have not weaned their children till they was 3 or over. Somebody said, what? Well, I'm like, I know of some. Ask my wife, she can tell you about some. But that is was common practice. But they weaned it. Then when it happened, notice what happened. It says, and Sarah saw the son of Hagar, the Egyptian, whom she had borne to Abraham, scoffing. My word says scoffing. What is your translation? Does it say scoffing, or what does it say? Scoffing. What is scoffing? There at the end of verse 9.
He was mocking.
Okay, mocking. That's what I thought. That was, some of them says mocking. Basically, making light of him. Making light, making fun, scoffing, putting down. He wasn't as big. He wasn't as strong. What we don't know. He was just. I think the word belittling. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
That was one of the words that some have said that was be a meaning, to belittle what we think today. So she was doing it. Therefore, and says she saw that. So Sarah said to Abraham, said, cast out this bondservant and her sons, for the son of this bondwoman shall not be heirs with my son, namely with Isaac. Not be, now, if he was just the son, in the way that most of the time happened back then, that son would have got most of the possession. The first son would end up getting, basically, would have got almost everything, and the younger ones would get gifts. They would get a gift. But the oldest one would take over the family business. That's the way we would say it today. But notice, she said that to him, but Abraham, when he said that, it says, and the matter was very what? Displeasing in Abraham's sight because of his son. No matter who it was, Hagar did have his son. And he recognized him as his what? His son. He had him circumcised already, and he was known in everybody, and he counted him as his son. But notice, but God said to Abraham, says, do not let it be displeasing to your sight because of the lad or because of your bondwoman. Whatever Sarah has said to you, listen to her voice, for in Isaac your seed shall be called. Now this is a promise that says in your seed. There was the seed that was promised to him back in 18 and then also in 12. It says, through thy seed all the nations of the earth would be what? Blessed. And that seed was going to come to not the bondservant, but come to what? Isaac. He said, do it. Then it says this. Yet I will also make a nation of the son of the bondwoman, because he is your what? Seed. Or your seed. He is your seed too, but he is not the seed. Does it make sense? He is your seed, but not the seed that had been promised. And so he said, so Abraham rose early in the morning and took bread and a skin. Why did he go do it? Why did he send them away? Because of Sarah? No. Because of what?
Well, God told him to do it.
God.
God said, go ahead and do what Sarah said.
Yes, but he did it because of what God had told him to do. This is the, if it makes sense, doing what he done, where he done it, was almost like sending that boy to death. Does it make sense? Give him some water, stuff, and send him out into the desert. But God told him to do what? To do it, and so he done it. And God told him, he said, now I am going to make a nation from him. And he believed God, and Abraham rose up, and he did that. And it says, and she departed into the wilderness, and the water of the skin was used up, that she put the boy under one of the scrubs. We see what happened there, and it ended up that God finally, now look at verse 19. After it was about to die, God opened her eyes, the bondservant, and she saw a well of water, and she went and filled the skin with water and gave the lad what? A drink. So God was with, now this is important, God was with what? The lad. God was with the lad, and he grew and dwelt in the wilderness and became a what? An archer. Like the town, I guess. Okay. He dwelt in the wilderness. Pam and his mother took a wife for him from the land of Egypt. This happened. He lived. Now, some had said, and I think it's true, that I bet you Abraham knew what happened. But the fact about it is, he still trusted in God. Now, what happened after that, we can see it happened because of that. And this happened, and God listened to him. Now, in verse 22, up in chapter 22, we're going to skip down on this thought. Chapter 22, it says, now it came to pass after these things that God tested Abraham and said to him, Abraham, and he said, here am I. Then he said, now take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you have loved, and go to the land of Moab, and offer him there with a burnt offering in one of the mountains, which I shall tell you. Now we're going to find out. We skipped down some, but the thing about it is, this isn't something he was just weaned. And then this is when he's up about 10 or 12 years old, this happened. So he saw the boy grow. He got kind of, this is going to, if you ever get to think about that, if you look at how old the bondservant son was when he left.
17.
He was about 17, teenager, right? A young man. And what was his other son when he was ended up being taken up? He was also a young one. A young man. So he went up, and notice what it said. It says, and he said, offer him at a burnt offering from one of the mountains. So Abraham rose early in the morning, saddled his donkey, and took two of his young men with him, and Isaac his son, and he split the wood for the burnt offering, and arose and went to the place which God had told him. Then on the third day, Abraham lifted his eyes and saw the place afar off. And Abraham said to his young men, stay here with the donkeys, and the lad and I will go up yonder and worship, and we will come back to you. Now, I think there's something to look at here, because he told them to go and what? Sacrifice. Is there a key to his thought in this statement? Because he told those men, he said, we are going to go up, and he said, and we will what? we turn unto you. Looked like he had already in his mind decided no matter what was going to happen, he and his son was going to do what? Come back. He had enough faith in God, he was going to go do it. But he thought, already we could see him thinking it's in the power of God. Well, wouldn't it be? Did God give it to him when his wife's wound was basically dead? He came forth when he shouldn't have been. And so we can see, he told them, we will come back to what? We will come back to you. And it says, so Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering and laid it on Isaac his son. And he took the fire in his hand and a knife. And the two of them went together. Now I tell you what, if you know anything about sacrifice or burning or whatever, it takes a little bit of wood to do what? To have a sacrifice, doesn't it? So this boy they had it on the animals, and he must have been pretty well what? Carrying a pretty good load. So the boy was carrying the load. Then Isaac spoke to Abraham, his father, and said, my father. And he said, here am I, my son. Then he said, look, the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for a burnt offering? He thought they had enough wood, they was going to burn a lamb. Where's the lamb, Dad? Where is the lamb? And Abraham said, my son, God will provide for himself the lamb for a burnt offering. So the two of them went together. Then they came to the place of which God had told him, and Abraham built an altar there and placed the wood in order, and he bound Isaac his son, and Isaac laid him on the altar upon the wood. So Abraham stretched out his hand and took the knife to stab his son. Now this is pretty. I don't know the description. We don't know what happened. But somehow he bound his what? Son. Yeah. It didn't say that he fought with his son. It don't say anything else. It looked like he just bound his son. Don't talk about the struggle. I think, matter of fact, I think looking at Isaac and looking at the Abraham relationship, I think when he said, stick out your hand, I think he had the faith in his father. And see it, what did he do? He probably stuck out his hand a lot. And was tied up, bound him, and put him there. But notice what happened. And when this happened, and Abraham stretched out his hand and took the knife to stab his son. But the angel of the Lord called to him from the heaven and said, Abraham, Abraham. So he said, here am I. He said, here am I. And he said, do not lay your hand on the lad, nor do anything to him. For now I know that you fear God, since you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me. Now when it says only son, we know he had another son, but the only son this was the only son of the promise of the seed. This was that only son that he had that promise to the seed. And Abraham called the name of the place, the Lord's well and provided. And it said to this day, in the mount, and the Lord, it shall be provided. Then the angel of the Lord called to Abraham a second time out of heaven and said, by myself I have sworn, says the Lord, because you have done these things, you have not withheld your son, your only son. Blessing, I will bless you, and multiply, I will multiply your descendants as the stars of the heaven and the sand which is on the beach, on the seashore. And your descendants shall possess the gates of their enemies. In your seed, now notice 18, in your seed all the nations of the earth shall be blessed, because you have obeyed my voice. So Abraham returned to the young man, and they rose and went together to what? Beersheba, and Abraham dwelt in Beersheba. Galatians 3:16 talks about this when it says the seed as of one, not of what? Many. And that seed was, that says, in your seed all the nations of the earth would be blessed. And who was that seed? Jesus Christ was the seed that came. This is what happened, and this is why he is called 22. 22 is like Hebrews 12. Faith chapter, we think of Hebrews 12 as being the faith chapter of the Bible, right? Or being 11. Here in 22, we just look at it and just double it, and you see the faith chapter in the Old Testament, the great faith that this man had, that he was going to be able to even raise him up from the dead. He had that much faith in Abraham, had in God. I just think this is why we call this the great faith chapter 22. Abraham, his faith. This is the same guy that didn't trust God. He lied about his wife and said, "This is my sister." I mean, now he didn't do this. He didn't change from this to this in 1 or 2 years, did he? Even look at this. When he sent his son away, he was weaned. Then when he was offered him to sacrifice, he was big enough to carry a whole stack of wood on his back, right? It was he was somebody that grew as he got older. Even at 100 years old, his faith was growing. Some of y'all here a little bit, one, I guess, maybe older than me, the rest of you not, but how many of us have seen, this sounds negative, but I have saw men of great faith when they got older lose faith. Does that make sense? Do you know what I'm saying? I know men that have been great leaders in the church, elders, when they got older, then all of a sudden lose faith. I know of gospel preachers that was great preachers, and then they got older, they lost their faith. Yes.
Do you think it was really all of a sudden that they lost it? Or that when they were younger it had the appearance of great faith, but because it wasn't built on a foundation it was being built upon, the farther along they got, the thinner that foundation became?
I believe it was great faith for them then, but I believe that if you don't use it,
right,
you lose it. Mm-hmm. I think they had, now some people, now you talking about people that fake it, or just give the appearance of strong faith. But I think
when they're younger, that might actually for them be strong faith, but as they get older, because like you said, if they're not practicing it,
people get, it's like a muscle builder or somebody that gets strong. If you don't keep on using your muscles, what happened to them? They become, I know of some great, people that was great athletes when they was younger. Then they get to be, fat old men. Just be honest with you. But the thing about it is, what happened to them, then I've known men that wasn't a great, I'm talking about people my age. I know men that wasn't very athletic in high school. But now, I went back at 50 years, I went back home to my reunion. I hadn't seen some of those guys in 40-some years. And I was so surprised at some of the big football players and the star. I looked at them and I said, what happened to them? Then I saw some of those skinny little old kids, and looked at the way and they was in better shape. I couldn't believe it. Now, that's physically. But don't you think the same thing can be true of spiritual? It's not what, we have to realize it's not what we was. It's not what we are. It's what we can do that counts. If we get to setting on our morals, we end up not having any morals. We have to use our morals. And this is what we see Abraham grew in what he was able to do. We could go to Solomon and see that he did the other way around. He was very wise when he was young, and then all of a sudden he took all the wives, he started sinning. The only thing I can say about Solomon, I hope that the last of the book he wrote was at the end of his life when he says, I finally came to the conclusion that all is vanity but the fear of the Lord. And so I'm hoping he went back. But you see there, a man that started out here that got to the point that he was allowing his wives to do idols and everything else. But the thing about it is, Abraham shows to me a man that kept on growing. Have you ever heard anybody say this? I know I'm too old to do that. I'm too old to learn. I'm going to leave that to younger men.
I'll leave some things to the younger men, that's all, because physically I'm not able to do something.
Well, but I'm talking
To learn them, they're never too old to learn.
too old to learn and too old to do the Lord's business. I mean, what somebody came to me the other day, here a while back, about 2 months ago. Somebody said to me, he said, "Preacher, have you retired?" I looked at him. I said, "I'm alive." And they said, no, have you retired? I said, "I'm alive." And finally they looked at me and said, "Okay, I understand what you're saying." I had to tell them twice. Because as far as a preacher, I don't believe a preacher or a Christian can anything, you may change what you're doing, but I plan on being a preacher all my life. I may not be filling a pulpit every Sunday, I may not be doing, but I still plan on being a preacher all my life. And if I get so I can't talk, I'm going to try to learn sign language. Okay? That's just the way that I feel. That's the way we are, because that's what I've chose to be. And that's what we have to decide. And the same thing about a Christian. We cannot retard from it. Like one of the men I'm talking about that was an elder, a great leader in the church. Great leader in the church, he retired at 64, 65 years old, bought a camper, and all of a sudden, inside of 2 years, he wouldn't even come to church anymore. He didn't have time for that because he was retired. They would go out in Kentucky, they would go out to the camping at weekends. When it came winter, they would come to Florida or someplace. They didn't have time to do. And that's sad. I'll tell you what, I'm not going to start the rest of it because the next one I want to have more time than 10 minutes too. So, but I just think that Abraham to me is a good example because he's a man that made some mistakes, didn't always do it, but seemed like he was trying. He did listen to people when he shouldn't have. But when God spoke to him, he paid attention, especially at hard times. I think he made some very hard decisions. I think it was a hard decision for him to leave home, don't you? I mean, to leave his family. Back then, where you was raised, you was there. That was part of it. It's almost like in Kentucky. When I moved to Kentucky as a young man, was baptized there. I remember talking to one of the elders at the church, and he was upset because one of his grandkids had moved. And he was upset. He said, "I can't understand why anybody want to leave Marshall County." His grandchild had moved to the next county, less than 20 miles away. And you would have thought she had moved to Mongolia. Because he was upset because I can't understand that. Well, I see that that used to be the way it was in a lot of places. Even in this time, you did not leave your family. Your family was what kept you what? Together. Today, we don't think about that because I talk to my kids in Oklahoma. We talk to them, all over. We call them up, talk to them almost every week. We talk to them why? But back in this time, back even 100 years ago, when somebody left, what did you not do? Very seldom did you ever what? See them again, right? It was hard.